When Clint Eastwood's car broke down outside a small, nearly forgotten auto shop tucked into the outskirts of Los Angeles, he didn't expect much, just a basic repair, maybe a gruff conversation and an oil-stained invoice. But what he got was something far different. Inside the dim shop, beneath flickering fluorescent lights and surrounded by the familiar scent of oil and metal, worked an aging mechanic whose movements were slow but exact, hands steady with the weight of years and experience. Something about the man stuck with Clint. Not the tools, not the shop, but the silence, the focus. There was dignity in the way he worked, a kind of quiet that echoed louder than words. Clint drove away that evening with his car fixed, but a question lingered. A week later he returned, not for a repair, but to say thank you. Instead, he found the shop closed, the doors locked, and what he discovered next would stop him in his tracks. But before we go further, tell us in the comments. What's one lesson you've learned from someone unexpected? We'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoy tales like this, make sure to subscribe. We have another one coming tomorrow. The Los Angeles sun was setting, draping the city in gold. Inside that humble auto repair shop, Henry Carter wiped his weathered hands on a rag, letting out a sigh that carried the weight of 7 decades. At 72, Henry had spent most of his life fixing engines and staying invisible. His one-man shop wasn't impressive, but it had survived, outliving corporate chains and glitzy repair centers because Henry wasn't just a mechanic. He was dependable, honest. But honesty didn't cover medical bills. Lately, his chest had been aching. A tightness he kept ignoring, brushing off as fatigue. He didn't have time for weakness. Not when there was still work to do. As he reached to turn out the lights, an engine coughed and sputtered outside, one of those sleek, too-perfect sounds that didn't belong to a Toyota or a Ford. He stepped to the garage entrance and squinted. A deep red Ferrari rolled to a stop, its growl dying completely as smoke hissed from under the hood, the kind of car you'd expect to see in a showroom, not limping into his cracked driveway. The door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a black leather jacket and dark jeans. Sunglasses came off slowly. His walk was calm, unhurried. There was no panic, no frustration, just presence. The kind of presence that made you wonder where you'd seen him before. "Evening," the man said. "Think you could take a look?" Henry glanced at the car, then back at the man. Something felt familiar, but he didn't dwell on it. Probably just another rich guy playing car enthusiast. "Too much luxury for my taste," Henry muttered, eyeing the machine. The man chuckled. "Maybe, but a car's still a car, right?" Henry smirked. "A motor's a motor." Without another word, he grabbed his tools and popped the hood. He didn't recognize Clint Eastwood, at least not immediately. Not the actor, not the director, not the man people called a legend. Right now, Clint was just another guy with a busted engine. As Henry leaned over the machine, his fingers moved with muscle memory built over half a century. Clint stood nearby, watching, not impatient, but genuinely interested. "You always work alone?" he asked. "Always have," Henry replied. His voice was coarse, not unfriendly. "Nobody wants to fix things anymore. Just swap parts and send the bill." Clint nodded. "I respect that. The old way still works." Henry snorted. "Damn right it does." He winced as a sharp pain flared in his chest. He didn't show it. Just shifted, forced himself to keep working. The man beside him didn't notice. Or so Henry thought. "I can fix this," he muttered. "Just give me a minute." What Henry didn't realize was that Clint wasn't just watching the engine. He was watching the man. Inside the garage, time seemed to slow. Clint stood, quietly as Henry twisted bolts and adjusted belts, muttering now and then about too many wires and no soul left in these machines. Clint smiled faintly, hands in his jacket pockets. I like people who do things the right way, Clint said. Henry scoffed. Then you're in the wrong city, kid. Clint didn't reply. He didn't have to. Henry went back to work. The dull pressure in his chest deepening. But he wouldn't stop. Not now. Not with someone watching who actually seemed to give a damn. It took nearly an hour, but Henry finished the job without shortcuts. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his breath slightly strained, but he never once asked for help. When he finally stepped back and wiped his brow, Clint was still there, leaning against the doorway, silent, respectful, watching. "She'll run now," Henry said, patting the hood with a tired hand. "Might not be showroom smooth, but she'll get you home." Clint approached slowly, opened the driver's side door, and turned the key. The Ferrari's engine roared to life, steady, smooth, like it had never stalled. Clint gave a small nod, more to Henry than the car. "You didn't just fix it," he said. "You listened to it." Henry shrugged. "You work on enough machines, they start talking to you. Not in words, just feel, tension, sound." He paused, hand pressed briefly to his chest. "Like people, I guess." Clint studied the man for a long moment. "You all right?" he asked. Not casually, but with genuine concern. Henry dismissed the question with a wave. "I've been worse." But Clint didn't move. He looked at the way Henry's fingers trembled slightly. The way he leaned just a little too hard against the workbench. It wasn't age, it was wear. Real, physical cost. Clint stepped forward and held out a folded stack of bills. "For the work," he said. Henry raised an eyebrow. "You serious?" "Dead serious," Clint said. "And there's more here than what you charged me, because you gave more than what I asked for." Henry opened the fold, saw the amount, and started to shake his head. "I didn't do this for charity." Clint nodded slowly. "I know. That's why you deserve it." For a second, neither man spoke. Just two people who understood value, of effort, of honesty, of doing the job right even when no one was watching. Clint tucked the rest of the cash into the tool bench drawer when Henry looked away. "If you won't take it in your hand, maybe you'll take it from the bench." Henry laughed, more of a hoarse cough than a chuckle. "Stubborn." "Guilty," Clint replied, sliding on his sunglasses, "and grateful." He stepped into the car, rolled the window halfway down, and looked at Henry one more time. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You're worth more than you let on." With that, he pulled away, the Ferrari gliding into the darkening street. Henry stood there watching, hand still on his chest, jaw clenched tighter than usual. He wouldn't say it out loud, but he'd needed that. Not the money, but the recognition, the respect. As the taillights disappeared down the road, he whispered to himself, "That guy's different." What Henry didn't know was that Clint drove only a few blocks before pulling over. He sat behind the wheel, thinking. Not about the car, but the man. Something wasn't right. Clint had seen enough people burn out to recognize it when it was right in front of him. And something about Henry's eyes, his silence, the way he pushed through the pain, it stayed with him. 1 week later, Clint Eastwood returned. Same car, same street. But this time, the garage door was closed, the windows dark. A small, closed indefinitely sign hung crookedly on the door. Clint stepped out of the car and walked up, his boots crunching the gravel. He knocked once. No answer. Then again. Nothing. Finally, he turned to leave, when a neighbor across the street called out. "Looking for Henry?" Clint turned. The man nodded toward the corner. "Ambulance took him last week. Heart attack. Thought he was done for, but they say he pulled through." "Where is he now?" Clint asked. "County Medical, room 402, I think." Clint didn't hesitate. County Medical wasn't glamorous. The walls were off-white, the lighting too bright, and the hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and dust. But Clint Eastwood moved through it with quiet resolve. No hat, no entourage, no announcement. Just purpose. He stopped outside room 402, hesitated for only a second, then knocked gently and stepped inside. Henry was lying in bed, thinner than Clint remembered, a tangle of wires and tubes hooked to his chest. His eyes were closed, a soft rhythm from the monitor filling the space. For a moment, Clint just stood there, watching, not out of pity, but respect. This was a man who had given every ounce of himself to others, and now there wasn't a soul sitting beside him. Henry stirred slightly, his eyes blinking open. He squinted, confused for a second, until recognition dawned. "You," he said, voice dry but steady. "Didn't expect to see you again." Clint stepped closer. "Didn't expect to come back. But I couldn't shake the feeling something wasn't right." Henry managed a crooked smile. "You were right." Clint pulled up a chair. "They treating you okay?" "Nurses are kind," Henry said. "Hospital food's worse than I remember, but I'm breathing, so I guess that's something." Clint nodded. "It's everything." The two men sat in silence for a moment, a comfortable one this time. Then Henry looked over. "You come to say goodbye?" Clint shook his head. "I came to say thank you, and to make sure you don't leave this world thinking no one noticed." Henry looked away for a second, emotion tugging at his features. "You're the only one who's visited," he said. "No family left. Most friends are gone. But I'm used to it." "You shouldn't be," Clint replied. "You spent your life fixing things for other people. Someone ought to be here for you." Henry stared at the ceiling, blinking slowly. "Funny," he said. "I fixed thousands of engines. Never thought one day it'd be mine that quit." Clint leaned forward slightly. "It didn't quit. It slowed down. And now it's someone else's turn to do the work." They talked, for a while longer, about old movies, cars, regrets, faith. Not a flashy conversation, just two men who understood time, and what it meant to live it well. Before leaving, Clint stood beside the bed and placed a small object on the tray table. It was a folded letter, nothing fancy, with Henry's name scrawled across the front. "What's this?" Henry asked. "You'll see," Clint said. "It's not for now, it's for later." As Clint walked out of the room, Henry's eyes followed him until he disappeared around the corner. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something new. 2 days later, a nurse walked in during the afternoon shift and found Henry sitting upright, a tear streaking one cheek, the letter open on his lap. She didn't ask what it said, but she noticed something different in his eyes, like the weight he'd been carrying had finally lifted. Inside the envelope Clint Eastwood had left behind, Henry found more than just words. The letter was handwritten, neat but firm, every sentence crafted with the same care Clint had shown when he chose silence over spectacle. "Henry," it began, "I've worked with people my whole life, some loud, some proud, a few worth remembering, but every once in a while you meet someone who does the right thing, not because there's a camera watching, not because they'll be praised, but because it's in their blood. You're one of those people." Henry kept reading, his hands trembling slightly. "You didn't ask me who I was. You didn't treat me like a celebrity. You treated me like a man who needed help. And you didn't do it halfway. You pushed through pain. You gave everything you had without complaint. That's not just work, that's character." He paused, blinking the tears away. "You said no one notices anymore." "Well, I did, and I'm not the only one. I made some calls. The shop you closed, it's opening again, fully renovated, all expenses handled, new tools, new crew, and your name above the door. If you want to come back, it's yours. If not, it'll serve others in your name. Either way, it lives on, just like your work did." At the bottom, Clint had signed his name, not with a signature that screamed status, but with one final line that made Henry's chest swell with something he hadn't felt in years. "Because real heroes don't wear capes. They wear grease." The key nurse stood at the doorway, silent, giving Henry space. And for the first time since he arrived at the hospital, Henry didn't look like a man near the end. He looked like someone finally seen. The video never aired. No reporters showed up. Clint Eastwood didn't post about it. He never gave a quote, never mentioned the man or the shop again. He simply went back to his quiet life, unchanged on the outside, but knowing he'd left something behind that mattered. And Henry? He walked out of that hospital a week later, slower than before, but standing tall. A new sign was waiting for him when he returned, Carter & Co., where engines and people get a second chance. If this story touched you, do something simple, but powerful right now, like this video. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what character truly looks like. And in the comments, tell us, who's the Henry in your life? Who gave quietly and never asked for anything in return? Let's give them the spotlight they never asked for, but absolutely deserve.